tonight, a look back at the biggest news stories of 2022. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder. Well, for 50 years, legalized abortion was the law of the land. That changed in June, though, when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, the 1973 ruling granting women the constitutional right to have the procedure. The conservative-leaning court instead ruled abortion access should be left up to the individual states. The decision sent shockwaves through the country. While pro-life advocates hailed the move, others claimed a war on women's rights. In tonight's top story, Abigail Robertson takes us back to the day the High Court's opinion was released.
The smiles from the court's most recent family photo have been replaced with scathing rebukes on paper. The court's conservative majority went further than upholding the Mississippi law, wading into abortion precedents like Roe v. Wade and Casey v. Planned Parenthood. Writing for the majority, Justice Samuel Alito said Roe must be overruled because the Constitution makes no reference to abortion, and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision. And far settling the matter, Roe and Casey have inflamed debate and deepened division.
It was wrong. Everyone knew it was wrong. Even the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was a significant proponent of abortion, said from the very beginning that Roe was a heavy-handed judicial intervention and it wrongly halted a political process.
In their dissent, expressing sorrow for the court and many millions of American women, the liberal justices of the court charged the constitutional regime we enter today erases the woman's interest and recognizes only the states or the federal governments. 26 states either already have or will quickly enact laws that ban or restrict abortion and will take effect immediately. A number of liberal states are taking the opposite approach.
This is New York. We're going to stand up, continue to fight back.
Abortions will remain legal in states like New York, where insurance providers are required to cover abortion procedures.
It is time for churches, for individuals, for leaders to step up and get involved in the lives of those in their communities that are facing unplanned pregnancies.
Pro-life advocate Allison Centofonte tells CBN News today is a huge win for the movement, but adds there is still great work to be done.
We have to do better for them. And so any woman that is considering her options in an unexpected pregnancy should absolutely go to the thousands of pregnancy resource centers across the country. There's counseling, prenatal services, ultrasounds, diapers, just support.
Former President Trump released a statement calling this the biggest win for life in a generation, saying it was only made possible because he nominated 3 constitutionalists to the Supreme Court.
This is a sad day for the country, in my view. But it doesn't mean the fight's over.
President Joe Biden called today's decision a tragic error.
The only way we can secure a woman's right to choose, and the balance that existed, is for Congress to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade as federal law.
Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
And as of today, at least 13 states have laws restricting access to abortion post-Roe. And many other places, court battles are still underway. In the aftermath of the Supreme Court's decision, crisis pregnancy centers became a target of pro-abortion activists. More than 60 centers have been firebombed or vandalized, putting workers in these nonprofit clinics and the women who need their services at risk, especially in blue states like Massachusetts. Heather Sells reports.
Not long after the historic abortion ruling, extremists attacked this crisis pregnancy center in Worcester. They spray-painted Jane's Revenge on the sidewalk and smashed the windows.
And the police were here waiting for us.
Director Kelly Wilcox says the intent was clear.
They're trying to put us out of business by attacking us.
An hour away in Revere, vandals spray-painted this center, leaving messages that put both staff and patients on notice.
We were concerned because that's a direct threat.
Crisis pregnancy centers in blue states like Massachusetts are facing uncharted waters. Backlash in the aftermath of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade and the possibility of more restrictions on their work. Instead of any kind of protection plan, municipalities like Worcester are considering ordinances to penalize these centers for what opponents call misleading communication. And the state's Attorney General, Maura Healey, has doubled down with a consumer advisory. It maintains that most centers are not licensed medical facilities, that unlicensed staff perform ultrasounds, and that they often provide inaccurate and misleading information about abortion.
Deception is at the heart of the typical CPC's business model.
Adding fuel to the fire is the state's own Senator Elizabeth Warren.
CPCs often lure women seeking legitimate reproductive care, including abortions, into their facilities.
In August, Warren introduced the Anti-Abortion Disinformation Act, designed to target CPCs nationwide.
Having to make a choice without all the information is not pro-woman.
Clinic directors like Teresa Larkin and Kelly Wilcox dispute the charges of deception and misinformation. They say their mission is to educate women in crisis about all of their options with peer-reviewed scientific facts.
They have to have good information to make a good decision.
Both clinics, like many others, explain online and on their consent forms that they do not provide or refer for abortions. For women wanting a choice, they offer a medical pregnancy test, an ultrasound to determine how far along they are, and consultations to discuss their options. Many of these women face economic hurdles and what is known as reproductive coercion.
We have people just, their parents won't pay for college if they have a baby, or, hey, I'm going to break up with you if you have this baby.
3 in 10 Clearway clients do choose abortion. Some, like Courtney, have chosen both abortion and life.
Even when I reached back out to them and told them that I did not keep my pregnancy, they still embraced me and still stayed in touch with me.
Courtney decided to keep her next child, a daughter, and says she hopes Clearway will stay in Worcester despite city and state pressure.
There's girls who really do need places like this, and it's the thing that empowers them, and it's the last stop that gives them that grain of hope that they long for.
NIFLA, a national organization for crisis pregnancy centers, says they provide incredible benefits for communities. $280 million worth of free support services each year. And of its 1,600 members, 1,400 are medical facilities.
Pregnancy centers that provide medical services absolutely have medical providers.
NIFLA counsel Ann O'Connor says only licensed staff provide medical services like ultrasounds, and she counters other allegations made by Massachusetts officials.
We're not deceptively advertising, so I'm not aware of any prosecution against any pregnancy center in any of those locales.
Mark Rienzi, the president of Beckett, a religious freedom law firm in Washington, D.C., says if there is evidence, officials can prosecute with consumer laws already on the books.
Ultimately, look, if the Attorney General has evidence that someone's actually been defrauded, that someone's been harmed, that somebody practiced medicine without a license, that somebody engaged in actual false advertising, Massachusetts already bans all those things. They're already illegal. And I'm sure there are plenty of prosecutors who would be eager to prosecute pregnancy centers who engaged in them.
And Rienzi warns that both blue and red states must be mindful of First Amendment rights for everyone.
The First Amendment is designed to stop governments from picking just one side of a debate, declaring it to be true, and punishing the other side.
For now, both Larkin and Wilcox are ramping up security, and they're making their case by reaching out to local and state officials.
We cannot just serve women and families. We've got to get out in the community and educate our lawmakers about who we are and how we bring such a benefit.
Reporting in Massachusetts, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Well, while Russia's war in Ukraine drags on, a sign of defiance and hope. The rebuilding effort in some parts of the country. Next. Turning overseas, for 10 months, Russia has been waging war against Ukraine, and attacks have targeted more than just the country's military powers. Earlier this year, the Ukrainian city of Bucha suffered unspeakable atrocities at the hands of Russian forces. Hundreds of civilians were brutally murdered and buried in mass graves. Still, in the middle of the horror, stories of miracles and God's protection unfolded. George Thomas traveled to Ukraine to bring us this story from Bucha.
This is one of the main roads leading to Bucha, a city on the outskirts of Kyiv.
Along this highway, burned-out Russian tanks serve as a reminder of Moscow's failed attempts to capture the capital. I can count at least 8 Russian tanks, and these are the tanks that were, in essence, guarding the road to Bucha. And it's really remarkable that since Russia's invasion on February 24th, that today the two cities of Bucha and Irpin are completely free and are in control of the Ukrainians. At one point, this spot became a popular gathering place for people taking pictures and walking amidst the charred remains.
The Russians should take these tanks and parade them in Moscow. The fact that we forced them out of Bucha is God's miracle. This is God's miracle and nothing else.
Despite the victory, the horrors of what happened in Bucha continue to haunt the nation. 15 miles west of Kyiv, forensic experts recently exhumed the bodies of 7 civilians found buried here in the forest. Investigators say one of the bodies had been decapitated.
Shots to the knees tell us the people were tortured. The hands tied behind the back with tape says that people had been held hostage for a long time, and they tried to get any information from them.
Russian forces withdrew from Bucha on March 31st. 4 months later, Ukrainian authorities are still finding bodies.
So far, we have not identified approximately 213 bodies of the dead. This is an operating figure. We identify bodies every day. Sometimes new bodies appear.
A European human rights delegation visiting Bucha late last month called the scene a theater of cold-blooded murder of civilians on a massive scale. Now, international investigators are gathering evidence to determine whether war crimes were committed.
We talk not only about those who committed the crime, the direct crime, on the spot and in location. They, of course, have responsibility. But we're also talking about those who are in the chain of command, if necessary, right to the very top.
Oleg Bondarenko knows how fortunate he is to be alive. A few days after war started, Russian soldiers captured this pastor along with several other civilians and tortured them behind this gate for days.
I was so nervous that they would find something compromising about me. The Russian battalion commander did not like me. He was always angry with me.
Bondarenko told CBN News that the Russians wanted information on Ukrainian military positions in the area.
The commander said he would make me watch as he killed the others, and then he would skin me alive.
Ukrainian soldiers launched a counter-offensive and managed to rescue Bondarenko.
The Russians didn't even have time to come and say goodbye to us. There were lots of our soldiers and the battle was intense.
Not far from Bondarenko, Sergei Anokhin and 167 Ukrainian Christians hid in the basement of this Bucha church when the Russian assault started.
4 Russian soldiers came into the basement. The rest were standing over there. There were 15 of them. When they entered the church, they kicked open the church door and cursed at us.
Remaining at the church for several days, the soldiers constantly intimidated those hiding in the basement. Video and pictures obtained by CBN News show church members praying, singing, and reading scriptures day and night.
We now know that during this time, while we sought refuge in the basement, people around us, many of them were being killed by the Russians. Many of them were being tortured.
Anokhin believes God spared their lives because of their prayers.
It was very clear to us that God was watching over us. Everything was in His hands. Like the story of how Daniel was in the lion's den. We were under God's protection.
Days after Russian troops withdrew from Bucha after failing to capture the capital, Ukraine's security agency met with Anokhin about a Russian commander who had been at the church.
One of the Russian soldiers, his nickname was Skipper, he would come and talk to us in the basement every day. We thought he was a kind soldier, but the Ukrainian security service later told us that he was one of the most cruelest soldiers and apparently ordered multiple killings and was responsible for torturing people in basements around Bucha.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
In April, Russia's President Vladimir Putin honored the brigade that laid siege to Bucha, calling their acts mass heroism and bravery. Ukraine has accused the brigade of committing war crimes.
I would like for people to pray for our city, that God would give peace in people's hearts. There's a lot of anger and hatred for what the Russians did to us, but I'm praying God will touch us and give us peace.
Anohin, whose home was destroyed on the second day of war, says residents of Bucha are slowly returning, trying to get back to normal. Still, the trauma from the war lingers, and the healing is only beginning.
I would like our city to be remembered for those who were loyal, those who protected the city, and those who were faithful to God.
George Thomas, CBN News, Bucha, Ukraine.
The red wave that wasn't. A look back at the 2022 midterm elections when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. In 2022, the midterm elections dominated the news cycle. Republicans hoped a red wave would help them gain control of the House and the Senate. But it was the red wave that wasn't. Though the GOP did become the majority party in the House, Republican candidates performed far worse than most people predicted. Matt Galka takes us back to just after Election Day, when many questions still remained about the future on Capitol Hill.
Tough inflation numbers and economic concerns looked like they were teeing up a Republican red wave through the midterms. But as the results started to come in on election night, it was more of a mixed bag. This morning, the much-anticipated midterm elections that could decide control of Congress. A pair of House seats in the Commonwealth of Virginia, a sign of split wins in House races across the country. Incumbent Democrat Abigail Spanberger beating Republican Yesli Vega. Elsewhere in Virginia, a Republican win.
We are here to celebrate tonight.
Republican candidate Jen Kiggins flipping a Democratic-held seat from incumbent Elaine Luria.
One of the bright spots for Republicans is Virginia's 2nd Congressional District, where Jen Kiggins beat two-term Congresswoman Elaine Luria.
However, as the night went on, the expected red wave failed to crest.
Democrats right now are feeling maybe pleasantly surprised. There were a lot of polls and early speculation that this night would be a massive wave for Republicans that we still haven't seen come through yet.
In the Senate, Republican J.D. Vance.
I think that we're going to continue to have some good victories all across the country.
Keeping a hotly contested seat in Republican hands, defeating Democrat Tim Ryan. In the battleground state of Pennsylvania, Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman is projected to win the Senate race over Dr. Mehmet Oz, a Democrat flip.
I never expected that we were going to turn these red counties blue. And tonight, that's why I'll be the next U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania.
In Nevada, Republican Adam Laxalt has inched into a slim lead over Catherine Cortez Masto, a potential gain for the Republicans. Meanwhile, in Georgia, Democrat incumbent Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker are neck and neck.
We always knew that this race would be close. And so here, that's where we are.
If you can hang in there a little bit longer.
That election could go to a December runoff, as both candidates struggle to get over 50% of the vote. The governor's mansion in Georgia staying red.
Let's celebrate this historic victory. While knowing there's still plenty of work to do.
Republican Governor Brian Kemp beating Democrat Stacey Abrams in a tough-fought rematch. In New York, Governor Kathy Hochul escaping a late-breaking surge in the governor's race from GOP candidate Lee Zeldin. While in Florida, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis crushing Democratic opponent Charlie Crist.
Thank you for honoring us with a win for the ages.
Now, the votes are still being counted in some of those races, and you could bet that both parties will be watching those counts closely, because with races this close, every vote matters. At the Capitol, Matt Gelka, CBN News.
And And that Georgia Senate race Matt reported on back in November has been decided. Earlier this month, Democrat Raphael Warnock besting Republican Herschel Walker in the state's runoff race there. That vote gave Democrats 51-49 majority in the Senate, breaking the 50-50 split seen since the 2020 election. All right, coming up, a historic hurricane hits Florida head on. How Operation Blessing helped pick up the pieces Ian left in its wake. Finally tonight, 2022 saw a historic hurricane hit Florida. Ian crashed into the coast in late September as a devastating Category 4. The destruction of property and impact on the people was gut-wrenching. But CBN's Operation Blessing was on the scene, working to bring help and hope to those hit hardest.
Hurricane Ian tore through southwest Florida, leaving life-altering devastation in its wake. Michael evacuated from his home in Port Charlotte. When he returned, what he saw was shocking.
You think about it for a second, and then you jump into action and you start trying to figure things out. What do I do first? What do I do next? Because it's devastation is all around us.
Operation Blessing is on the ground in Port Charlotte and ready to help the community.
They might have had trees fall in their yard. Some of them have had massive flooding. We cannot do what we do without the support of our volunteers and our partners.
Paul Cross is one of Michael's neighbors, and when he heard Operation Blessing's call for volunteers, he was the first to show up.
I didn't have a whole lot of damage. Once I cleaned up what there was, I was sort of looking for a way to volunteer to help people out. And somebody came by with a flyer for Operation Blessing, and I saw in there that'd be a perfect way to help other people out.
Paul can't do it alone. Operation Blessing needs volunteers to help restore the lives of those impacted by this deadly natural disaster.
Operation Blessing is just spiritually, you guys are on time. We're so ready for you guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, and that's going to do it for Faith Nation. Thank you so much for joining us at this look back at 2022. Have a great night and see you next year.